There's a part of you you've never met. It hides behind your smile. It watches through your eyes. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it speaks through your anger. Most people believe they know who they are. They say, "I'm a good person," or "I'd never do something like that." But Carl Jung warned, the moment you define yourself only by what's good, you've already split in half. You've buried everything inconvenient, shameful, and raw, and called it not me. That buried half is what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not imagination. It's the hidden archive of every impulse you denied, the rage you swallowed to stay polite, the envy you disguised as criticism, the fear you disguised as logic, the desires you condemned in others. All of it lives inside you, shaping your reactions while you pretend to be in control. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." We think evil is out there, in politicians, strangers, villains on screens. But the first battlefield is always within. You project what you refuse to own. That's why the liar calls others dishonest, the cruel demand kindness, and the weak despise strength. The world becomes a hall of mirrors reflecting the faces you're afraid to see. When you rage at someone, ask yourself, what part of me is this person reminding me of? It's an unsettling question, because the answer is almost always something you've buried. Jung's insight was mercilessly simple. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about the relationships that collapsed for no reason, the decisions that kept repeating, the bursts of emotion that felt bigger than the moment. Each was the shadow steering you through the fog, and the more you deny it, the stronger it grows. Suppression feeds it. Pretending to be nice turns it into poison. The anger you never voice curdles into resentment. The pride you hide becomes self-hatred. The guilt you bury becomes control over others. Soon you're a stranger inside your own skin, polite on the surface but boiling underneath. That's why people snap. That's why saints turn tyrants, lovers turn cruel, leaders turn corrupt. The shadow, ignored too long, erupts and takes the throne. Jung saw it in the horrors of his century, ordinary citizens committing unspeakable acts, believing they were righteous. He realized humanity's darkest crimes weren't born from monsters, but from people who refused to look in the mirror. And the shadow is clever. It wears masks. It hides behind moral slogans, religion, politics, even kindness. It whispers, "I'm doing this for good." That's the most dangerous form of darkness, the kind that thinks it's light. So what happens when you finally turn toward it? At first, terror. You see thoughts you're ashamed of, impulses you swore you didn't have. You meet the version of yourself you've avoided since childhood. But if you stay, if you keep looking, something miraculous happens. The monster begins to speak truth, because inside that darkness is everything you've repressed, but also everything powerful you've lost. Your anger hides your strength. Your envy hides your potential. Your arrogance hides your buried confidence. The shadow is not pure evil. It's pure energy. It's your raw life force, twisted by neglect. The goal isn't to destroy it, it's to integrate it. To say, yes, that's me too, but I choose how it moves. That's real maturity. That's real freedom. Jung warned that chasing endless positivity only deepens the divide. People who preach constant light are usually running from their own dark. They confuse repression with virtue. But the soul doesn't want purity. It wants wholeness. And wholeness means carrying your contradictions without shame. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Light without shadow is blindness. Shadow without light is despair. You need both to see. So when you feel jealousy, rage, greed, or fear, don't run. Observe, name it, own it. Every time you do, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Because the first law of shadow work, the dark truth nobody wants to hear, is this: The darkness you refuse to face will rule your life forever. The moment you face it, it loses its chains. You stop being possessed by what you deny. You start becoming whole. And that's where true strength, not fake virtue, is born. Every person you meet is a mirror. Some reflect your kindness, others reflect your fears, and the ones you can't stand, they reflect your shadow. Carl Jung believed that what we reject inside ourselves, we're doomed to meet again in the world, disguised as other people. You don't hate them for who they are. You hate them for showing you what you've buried. That's the dark genius of projection. It's the mind's way of saying, this part of you is too painful to own, so let's pretend it belongs to someone else. You'll know it's happening when your emotions explode out of proportion. When someone's behavior shouldn't bother you that much. But it does. It burns. That's not them. That's you. Looking into a mirror you don't want to see. Think about it. You meet someone confident and instantly dislike them. You tell yourself they're arrogant, full of themselves. But if you dig deeper, maybe that person just reminds you of your own confidence, the kind you were told to suppress, the kind that got punished when you were a child for showing off. So you buried it, and now you see it as a threat. Or maybe you meet someone lazy, and you feel disgusted, furious even. But maybe what you're really seeing is your own fear of being unproductive, your secret exhaustion, your hidden resentment toward the way you never allow yourself to rest. Your mind turns that buried fatigue into anger at someone else's freedom. That's projection. The shadow using others as a movie screen to display the parts of yourself you refuse to watch. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." It's not a comforting truth, because it means every conflict, every judgment, every insult you throw is an X-ray of your own inner world. When you say, "I can't stand fake people," maybe it's because there's a part of you that performs every day to be accepted. When you say, "I hate people who brag," maybe it's because you secretly crave recognition you've never given yourself. When you say, "I hate selfishness," maybe you're angry at how little you've allowed yourself to take what you actually need. The people who annoy you the most are your teachers. They're dragging your shadow into daylight. Jung observed that humanity's greatest danger isn't external evil. It's unconscious projection on a global scale. When societies refuse to face their collective shadow, they start seeing it in enemies, outsiders, and scapegoats. That's how wars begin. That's how hatred justifies itself. That's how ordinary people commit extraordinary cruelty, all in the name of defending themselves from the monsters they can't admit live inside them. History repeats itself because the psyche does. We replay our inner conflicts on the world stage. And yet, if projection is the problem, it's also the clue. Because what you project reveals exactly where your work is. If someone's arrogance enrages you, that's where your humility is wounded. If someone's sadness irritates you, that's where your compassion is starved. If someone's freedom makes you uncomfortable, that's where your soul is trapped. The shadow doesn't just hide darkness, it hides potential. What you reject in others might be the part of you waiting to be born. There's a story of Jung visiting a patient who despised her husband. She said, "He's selfish, he's cold, he only thinks of himself." Jung asked, "And how do you think of yourself?" She paused and realized she had lived her entire life for others, denying every personal desire. Her husband wasn't just her enemy, he was her mirror, showing her everything she was afraid to claim. That's what makes shadow work so uncomfortable. It removes the luxury of blame. Once you understand projection, you can no longer live as a victim. Because you realize that every person who triggers you is pointing toward your unfinished business. So next time you feel that sudden anger, that burning irritation, stop. Don't ask, "Why are they like this?" Ask, "Why does this affect me so much?" That single question has the power to dissolve years of illusion. Because here's the paradox. When you stop projecting, the world becomes less hostile. You no longer see enemies, you see reflections. You stop fighting people for what's inside you. And slowly, peace begins. But most people will never get this far. Because the ego loves the illusion of innocence. It wants to be right. It wants villains to blame. It would rather live in a world of enemies than face the shadow that fuels them. That's why Jung said confronting the shadow is not a journey for the faint of heart. Because it means dismantling the entire identity you've built on judgment. It's easier to stay blind. To scroll through life pointing fingers, gossiping, ridiculing, condemning, never realizing that every accusation is an autobiography. But if you can catch yourself in that moment, if you can see projection as it happens, something extraordinary occurs. The energy that once went into resentment turns into awareness, and awareness changes everything. You stop trying to fix others. You stop expecting the world to heal your wounds. You realize the person you're fighting is you. That realization is painful, but it's also liberation. Because when you see through projection, the world stops being a battlefield and starts becoming a mirror of growth. You no longer react. You observe. You no longer hate. You understand. And slowly, your shadow begins to lose its grip. So the second law of the shadow, Jung would say, is this. The people you can't stand are your greatest mirrors. When you face them, when you stop blaming them, you reclaim the parts of yourself you've lost. And each time you do, your consciousness expands. You become a little less fragile, a little more whole. Because in the end, shadow work isn't about light versus dark. It's about seeing clearly. And clarity is power. There comes a moment in everyone's life when the outside world goes quiet, and suddenly, you can hear the war inside your own mind. That's when the shadow stops hiding. Jung once said that the shadow is not evil, it's primitive. It's the ancient self that still lives inside you, the part that doesn't care about morality, reputation, or appearances. It only cares about truth. It's truth. And when you ignore it for too long, it begins to rebel. You'll feel it as anxiety that has no cause, as sadness that makes no sense, as anger that seems to appear out of nowhere. That's not random emotion. That's your shadow pounding on the wall saying, "You can't bury me forever." Most people run from that voice. They numb it with distraction, social media, work, constant noise. They drown it with substances, relationships, or spiritual bypassing. But the more they escape, the louder the shadow becomes. Because it doesn't want silence, it wants recognition. This is the inner war, the battle between the self you pretend to be and the self you actually are. Imagine you're standing in front of two mirrors. In one you see your public self, composed, kind, successful, smiling. In the other, you see something raw, emotional, unpredictable. That's your shadow. And every time the two reflections don't match, tension builds. That tension, that inner split, is the birthplace of suffering. Jung said that neurosis, depression, and emotional chaos often come from one thing: the refusal to live as a whole person. You try to live only as your light side, but half of you remains in the dark. And that unacknowledged half starts leaking through your cracks, in your tone, your choices, your dreams. That's why people sabotage their own happiness. That's why someone who finally gets love suddenly pushes it away. That's why a person who reaches success suddenly falls into guilt or fear. It's not self-destruction. It's the shadow demanding balance. Carl Jung once analyzed a man who kept having nightmares about being chased by a wolf. He tried to escape, but no matter how fast he ran, the wolf was always there. After months of analysis, Jung told him, "The wolf is you. Stop running. Turn around and face it." When the man finally faced the wolf in his dream, it stopped attacking him. It became calm. It followed him peacefully. That was the moment integration began. The wolf didn't disappear. It transformed. Because the shadow doesn't vanish when faced. it becomes an ally. Your anger, once understood, becomes assertiveness. Your jealousy, once explored, becomes self-awareness. Your fear, once accepted, becomes wisdom. The same energy that once destroyed you can start protecting you, but only if you dare to meet it. Here's the dark truth Jung discovered. The shadow is not your enemy. Your fear of it is. When you reject your shadow, you create a split inside your psyche. Two versions of you fighting for control. One is polished and social. The other is ancient and wild. And the further apart they grow, the more chaotic your life becomes. That's why people feel like imposters. Why they say, "I don't know who I am anymore." Because part of them is alive in daylight, and part of them is trapped in the dark. Healing begins the moment you stop trying to destroy the shadow and start trying to understand it. But be warned, when you begin this process, your mind will resist. The ego doesn't want to lose control. It will whisper lies like, "You don't have a dark side. You're better than them. Just stay positive." These are not affirmations. They're defense mechanisms. They protect your comfort, not your growth. The moment you start questioning your reactions, your ego feels threatened. Because every insight into your shadow chips away at the false image it has built. But that discomfort is a sign you're moving in the right direction. You're entering the territory of truth. And here's what happens next. Once you begin facing the shadow, your perception changes. People who once triggered you start making sense. Your relationships become clearer. You begin to notice patterns you never saw before. You realize that most of your life you weren't living, you were reacting. Reacting to wounds you never healed. To parts of yourself you never loved. That realization is painful. But it's also awakening. Because suddenly, you're no longer trapped inside your old story. You're watching it. You're aware. This is the real heart of shadow work. Awareness. Not fixing, not erasing, not pretending to heal. Just seeing clearly. The shadow thrives in blindness. The moment you shine the light of awareness, it begins to dissolve. Because it can't manipulate you once you've seen it. And that's the difference between control and freedom. People who control their emotions by repression are slaves. People who understand their emotions through awareness are free. The truth is, every inner war is a call for integration, a demand from your unconscious saying, "Stop dividing yourself." The goal is not to become perfect, but to become real. And when you finally stop running from your darkness, something unexpected happens. You begin to respect it. You see that the shadow holds not just rage and pain, but also beauty. It holds your wild creativity, your passion, your authenticity, the traits that make you alive. That's why Jung said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from the way we see ourselves. That other is your shadow, your unfiltered, uncensored truth. And when you make peace with it, your inner war ends. You stop splitting yourself into good and bad. You become one. And that oneness, that reunion of all your parts, is the true definition of peace. So the third law of the shadow is this. What you fight within fights you back, until you make it your ally. When you stop fearing the war inside you, you realize it was never a war at all. It was your own self, begging to be seen. There's a moment in every person's journey when silence feels different. It's no longer the silence of running away. It's the silence of acceptance. When you stop fighting what's inside you, the war finally ends. And that's when you meet the most powerful version of yourself, the whole you. Carl Jung called this moment individuation. It's the process of becoming undivided, of pulling together the light and the darkness and saying, "Yes, both are me." But before that peace arrives, something strange happens. You go through a kind of death, Not physical, but psychological. Your old identity begins to crumble. The version of you that survived by pretending, performing, or hiding. It can't survive the truth. And so, it starts to fade. You feel disoriented, almost empty. You start questioning everything. Your values, your relationships, even your faith. This is what Jung described as the night sea journey. It's when your consciousness descends into the depths of the unconscious, and you must face the ghosts that live there. You see every wound, every suppressed memory, every shameful thought you ever tried to bury. And the instinct is to look away. But Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the core of shadow work. Not denying darkness, not romanticizing it, but walking through it, awake. When you accept your shadow, your energy shifts. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop craving validation and start valuing truth. People notice it immediately, though they can't explain it. They'll say, "You've changed." But the truth is, you didn't change. You integrated. Your kindness no longer comes from weakness. It comes from strength. Your calm no longer hides fear. It radiates from understanding. Because now you know who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. That's the paradox of the shadow. The more you face the darkness, the brighter your light becomes. It's like cleaning a mirror. The dust of denial was never you. It only blocked the reflection. Once it's gone, you can finally see yourself clearly.